Her name is Emily, a 28-year-old woman caught in the suffocating grip of her family's expectations. She's always lived in the shadow of her younger brother Ryan, the golden child. Ryan, who could do no wrong in their eyes, while Emily could never seem to measure up. Her parents' adoration for Ryan seemed endless, his achievements celebrated, his flaws overlooked. And for years, Emily accepted the role of the invisible child. But everything changed the day her parents mocked her. Publicly. Cruelly. On Ryan's wedding day, it's better if you're not there. Those words tore through her, deeper than any wound she had ever felt. For as long as she could remember, Emily had swallowed their cruel remarks, the constant comparisons. She had been second to Ryan in every way. Always overlooked, always dismissed. But this time, this was different. That moment, that single sentence, ignited a fire inside her. The damage was done. Her parents had shattered whatever illusion of love she once clung to. It wasn't just a family disagreement anymore. It was a betrayal. And Emily realized something that day. Ryan's wedding wasn't just a family gathering. It was the moment she would reclaim her voice. The day she would decide whether to let her family destroy her or to finally set herself free. Have you ever felt invisible in your own family? How did you handle the moment when you were pushed too far? Share your thoughts in the comments. Emily's family was built on expectations, appearances, and an unwavering sense of hierarchy. Her parents, Victoria and Thomas, were successful executives who had climbed the corporate ladder with fierce determination, and they instilled that same drive in their children. Perfection was not just an ideal, it was the standard they demanded. For them, success wasn't measured in small wins or personal growth. It was about outward accolades, perfect grades, flawless presentations, and a carefully curated image. Ryan, Emily's younger brother, was the embodiment of that perfection. From the moment he could talk, he was praised for his intelligence, his athleticism, his charm. He was the model child, the one who always did things right. A straight-A student, an athlete with multiple championships under his belt, and a social butterfly with a magnetic personality. Ryan never seemed to try, yet everything he did came effortlessly. He was always the star of the show, the one their parents held up as the gold standard of what a child should be. Emily, on the other hand, struggled to fit into the mold that her parents had carved out. She wasn't bad at anything. She just didn't excel in the way Ryan did. She didn't have his natural charisma or his athletic ability. School came easy to him, while Emily had to work twice as hard for the same grades. No matter how hard she tried, no matter how many hours she put in, she couldn't seem to live up to their expectations. Her parents were never overtly cruel, but their indifference cut deeper than any harsh words could. They didn't seem to care when Emily did something impressive, like securing a promotion at work or organizing a successful art exhibition. Instead, their attention was always focused on Ryan's latest success. Whether it was a football game or a prestigious award, Ryan's achievements were celebrated with the same level of enthusiasm that Emily's went unnoticed. It wasn't just the achievements that set them apart. It was the very way they were treated. Ryan's mistakes were excused, his flaws downplayed, while Emily's every misstep was magnified. Her parents would smile politely, nodding in approval of Ryan's every word, but when Emily spoke, they would dismiss her with barely concealed impatience. She had learned to keep her accomplishments quiet, afraid of drawing attention to herself, knowing it would only be met with awkward silence or polite, distant applause. As the years passed, the tension in their home thickened. Emily began to feel like a stranger in her own family, as though she didn't belong in the carefully constructed world her parents had created. Her place at the table was always at the edge, never at the center where Ryan was placed. And though she tried to suppress it, the resentment began to build. an undercurrent of bitterness that only intensified when her parents would declare, "We're so proud of Ryan. He's going to do great things." The words stung, cutting into the part of Emily that had tried so hard to make them proud. Yet, she held on. She kept striving, convincing herself that one day they would see her worth. But deep down, Emily knew it was futile. Their love for Ryan was unwavering, unconditional, and there was nothing she could do to change that. And then came Ryan's wedding. It was supposed to be a joyous occasion, the celebration of his future with his beautiful fiancée, a picture-perfect couple to match the perfect life. Emily had assumed her parents would, at the very least, show some form of attention to her. After all, she was family too. But nothing could have prepared her for the cruelty that would unfold on that day. Ryan's wedding wasn't just another event. It was the culmination of years of expectations, hidden resentments, and fractured family dynamics. The moment Emily walked into that room, she could feel the weight of it all pressing down on her. She had been invisible for so long, but this moment would change everything. The words her parents would speak to her that day would tear through the fragile facade she had been clinging to. In one single instant, everything she had ever wanted, approval, love, acknowledgement, would slip through her fingers, leaving nothing but the raw truth. In her family, she was nothing more than an afterthought. And that would be the breaking point. Ryan's wedding day arrived, and Emily found herself once again on the outskirts of her own family's life. The whirlwind of preparations had long been dominated by her parents, Victoria and Thomas, who insisted on perfection in every detail. Emily had been relegated to organizing the seating plan, running errands, and managing last-minute tasks. Her role was clear: to be the dutiful, invisible sister, always in the background, always overshadowed. As the day unfolded, the contrast between Ryan's spotlight and Emily's peripheral existence could not have been more stark. Ryan was the star of the show, as he always had been. Guests showered him with compliments, praised his achievements, and admired his perfect fiancée. Everywhere Emily looked, there was laughter, warmth, and attention being lavished on her younger brother. And there she stood, quietly arranging chairs or smoothing out wrinkles in tablecloths, her heart aching with the weight of a lifetime of being unseen. But it wasn't just the external celebration that cut Emily. It was the subtle but constant message that she didn't matter. The way her parents, even in the midst of the joyful chaos, gravitated toward Ryan as though he was the center of the universe. They spoke with him as if his words were the only ones that held significance. Emily couldn't help but feel like an outsider, like she was just a bystander in a family she had always tried so desperately to be a part of. The tipping point came just a few days before the wedding. Emily had been running errands for her mother, carrying boxes of wedding favors and checking the floral arrangements. She was tired, physically and emotionally drained, but she kept going, determined to be the perfect daughter for once. It was then, as she passed by the kitchen, that she overheard her parents' conversation. "Do we really need to have Emily at the wedding?" Her mother's voice drifted into the hallway, casual but cutting. "She's just going to ruin everything. It's better if she isn't there at all. Let's not have her be a distraction." The words hit Emily like a physical blow, each syllable slicing through her chest. It wasn't just the cruelty of the statement. It was the coldness with which her mother had said it, as if she was speaking about a stranger. As if Emily was nothing more than an inconvenience to be tolerated, rather than a daughter to be loved. Emily stood frozen in the hallway, her body stiff with shock. Her breath became shallow, her pulse racing. The room felt as though it was closing in on her, the weight of her mother's words pressing against her chest. The realization that her parents had never truly seen her, never truly cared about her beyond the image she was supposed to project, hit her like a ton of bricks. She had always known they favored Ryan, but hearing her own mother say those words, so openly and without remorse, was a cruel awakening. For a long moment, Emily couldn't move. The world around her seemed to fall away as she grappled with the realization that her entire life had been built on an illusion. She wasn't just living in her brother's shadow, she was a ghost in her own family, constantly striving for approval from people who had no intention of ever giving it. The impulse to cry, to scream, to make them understand, flooded her. But instead, she felt something different. A burning, tight knot of anger formed in the pit of her stomach. All these years of striving, of bending herself to fit into a mold that was never meant for her. It was all for nothing. She had been reduced to nothing more than a background character in her own life. But that, right there, was the moment that changed everything. Emily left the house that night. Her legs moved on autopilot, carrying her away from the suffocating atmosphere of her childhood home. As she stepped out into the cool night air, she felt an unfamiliar sense of clarity settling over her. The weight of her parents' words didn't feel as heavy anymore. Instead, they felt like the final piece of the puzzle falling into place. This was no longer about gaining their approval or fitting into their world. It was time to stop begging for validation, time to stop feeling like an outsider in her own life. She had spent years contorting herself to fit their vision of who she should be, but she wasn't going to do it anymore. She wasn't going to let them define her worth any longer. That night, a shift took place within Emily. The anger and resentment that had festered inside her for so long began to transform into something else, a quiet but firm resolve. She wasn't going to sit back and be overlooked again. She wasn't going to wait for her parents' approval anymore. It was time to take control of her own narrative, to stop allowing others to dictate her worth. She wouldn't beg for love. She would demand respect. This was the beginning of her reclaiming herself, of stepping into the power she had long ignored. And no one, not even her own parents, would stand in her way again. The betrayal came like a sharp knife in the night, a wound so deep it left her breathless. Emily arrived at Ryan's wedding with a newfound determination, wearing the best dress she could find, her chin lifted, and her heart set on proving to herself, and to them, that she was not the invisible sister anymore. She had spent years in their shadows, overlooked and underestimated, but tonight, that would change. She would make her presence known. But as she entered the reception hall, ready to confront her family with her newfound resolve, reality struck like a thunderclap. The moment she stepped inside, Emily was greeted not with warmth, not even with indifference, but with cold, deliberate distance. Her mother, standing in the middle of a conversation with guests, didn't even glance in her direction. It was as if Emily was a ghost, someone who wasn't supposed to be there. Her heart sank, but she refused to let it show. She forced herself to smile, to mingle with the crowd, trying to fit in, to find her place in a room that seemed to have no space for her. But no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't shake the feeling of being out of place, as if she was intruding on a celebration she had no part in. At the height of the evening, as the music swirled around her and guests laughed, her father approached. She could see him coming from across the room, his gait smooth and confident as always, the air of authority that had once commanded her respect, now a mere reminder of how much he had never seen her. He flashed a smile, but it was the kind of smile that didn't reach his eyes. The smile of someone who was pretending, playing a role he thought was expected of him. "You know," he said, leaning in close, his voice low enough for only her to hear, "it would have been better if you just stayed home. You're not really needed here." His words, soft yet cutting, landed like daggers in her chest. The pain wasn't in the cruelty of his tone, but in the finality of his statement. He wasn't just dismissing her, he was erasing her. as if she were nothing but a bothersome fly, an inconvenience he could do without. The years of feeling invisible, the countless moments when her presence had been ignored or belittled, all crashed into her in that single instant. Emily stood frozen for a moment, her breath catching in her throat. The weight of the moment was too much to bear. She wanted to scream, to lash out, to throw all the years of resentment back at him. But instead, she stood there in silence, a sickening knot forming in the pit of her stomach. She wanted to run, to escape the suffocating feeling of being utterly alone in the crowd. But the sting wasn't over yet. From across the room, Ryan, her younger brother, smiled awkwardly in her direction. There was no warmth in his gaze, no recognition of the years they had spent together growing up. It wasn't even an apology, just a hesitant, uncomfortable smile, as though he were trying to avoid the reality of what was happening. She caught his eye, hoping for something, anything, that could make this unbearable moment feel more bearable. But there was nothing. The uncomfortable glance from Ryan felt like another blow, deeper than the one from her father. It wasn't just her parents' coldness that cut her. It was the absence of her brother's support. The silence from the one person who should have understood her better than anyone. The realization hit her harder than anything else could. This wasn't just a family issue. This wasn't just about a wedding, a moment in time. This was her entire life being laid bare. Her family had never truly cared for her. She wasn't a part of their world. She was a mere accessory, something they could tolerate when it was convenient but push aside when it wasn't. And in that moment, as Emily stood amidst the laughter and chatter of the reception, surrounded by people who smiled and celebrated as if everything were normal, she realized the truth. She had been living in a lie for years. She had been trying to fit into a family that had never wanted her to belong. Her heart shattered, and the flood of emotions she had been holding back for so long came rushing to the surface. Betrayal, loneliness, anger. The pain of being invisible in her own family, the frustration of never being enough, it all boiled over in that one defining moment. But this wasn't the end. As the wedding continued around her, Emily realized something she hadn't before. She no longer needed their approval. She no longer needed to be part of a family that saw her as an outsider. The moment they had pushed her away, they had given her the freedom to stand on her own. She wasn't invisible anymore, and she wasn't going to be silenced. Not anymore. Emily's plan began that very night, though it wasn't one she had initially prepared for. The betrayal, the cruel rejection from her family, had done something to her. It shattered the remaining illusions she held about her parents, her brother, and the family they had built. But from that heartbreak, a fire was ignited. A fire that burned away the need for their approval. For the first time in her life, Emily was free. Free from their judgment, free from their constant belittling, free from the belief that she wasn't enough. She wasn't going to let them continue treating her as if she was invisible. She wouldn't let the years of hurt and rejection go unanswered. Her mind began to churn, not with thoughts of self-pity, but with a cold, calculated resolve. It was time for her to take control of her life, to make them realize the damage they had done. The first step in her plan was to distance herself. She stopped attending family events, those suffocating gatherings where she was always relegated to the edges of their lives. No more forced smiles, no more pretending to be a part of a family that never saw her. Emily found new friends, people who valued her for who she was, not for the image she was supposed to uphold. It was freeing, the space she created for herself. Slowly but surely, she built a new life, one that didn't revolve around her family's toxic expectations. She started her own company, an art consulting firm where her creativity could shine. Her reputation as a visionary in the art world grew, and with each success, She felt the weight of her old family life lift. She was thriving, not because of them, but in spite of them. But Emily wasn't finished yet. She had been broken, yes, but she was no longer the quiet, invisible sister. She was no longer the one who begged for love. She was stronger now, strong enough to take action, and she wasn't going to let her family's betrayal go unpunished. She began to leak information, small, almost imperceptible leaks at first, whispers here and there, whispers that found their way into the right hands, financial misdeeds, lies, unethical practices that had been hidden behind closed doors for years. Emily knew her parents' world, the one they had so carefully constructed, was built on a foundation of deceit and manipulation. Her parents had always prided themselves on their perfect image, their perfect family. But Emily knew the cracks that ran deep beneath the surface. She knew about the shady investments her father had made to cover up losses. She knew about the tax evasion schemes they had been running for years. She knew about the underhanded tactics they used to secure high-paying clients and eliminate their competitors. And so, she began to pull at the threads. At first, it was small leaks, an anonymous tip to the local business journal, a note sent to an old acquaintance of her mother's, an email to an investigative reporter with a few key pieces of damning information. Slowly but surely, the truth began to seep out. The first story broke about her father's financial troubles, hidden investments, money laundering, and shady dealings that had kept their family afloat. The world they had built so carefully, so meticulously, began to crumble. It was just the beginning. As the whispers grew louder, Emily felt the thrill of satisfaction course through her veins. She hadn't just walked away from them, she was forcing them to confront the lies they had built their lives on. Her family, the ones who had always viewed her as less, were now the ones who were being exposed. Her father's business empire, once untouchable, began to falter. The public eye turned on them, the press swarming around their every move, exposing their secrets one by one. Emily didn't stop there. As the walls around her family's facade crumbled, she used her newfound power to elevate herself even further. She poured herself into her art consulting business, building connections, gaining respect, and becoming a force in the industry. Every time she closed a deal, every time she received a compliment on her work, she knew it was one more victory against the family who had never believed in her. And then, as the final blow, Emily released the truth to the public. The full extent of her parents' corruption, the lies, the manipulation, it all came to light. It wasn't just business anymore. It was personal. The very family that had torn her down, that had made her feel worthless, now found themselves at the center of a scandal that threatened to tear them apart. The fallout was inevitable. Her parents' business empire collapsed. The public began to turn against them, their friends and colleagues distancing themselves as the truth became undeniable. But Emily? She was no longer the invisible sister, standing on the edge of a family that didn't care. She had taken back her power, rebuilt her life on her own terms, and made sure her family would never forget the price they paid for their cruelty. In the end, Emily didn't need revenge in the traditional sense. The destruction of her family's perfect world was her redemption. She had finally found her place in the world, not as a shadow, but as a force in her own right. The final confrontation came unexpectedly, but Emily knew that it was the moment she had been waiting for. She had spent years suffering in silence, building a life apart from the suffocating grip of her family, but now the time had come for everything to unravel. Her parents had invited her to an event at their mansion, a gala where the elite would gather, where the family would put on a show of unity, of success, and of the perfect image they had spent their lives cultivating. It was a carefully orchestrated performance, designed to maintain the illusion that their world was pristine, unbreakable. But Emily knew better. And as she walked through the front doors of the mansion, she felt the weight of the moment settle over her. This was her time. The world had already begun to see the cracks in their perfect facade, but now she was going to shatter it completely. The grand hall was filled with guests, their laughter and chatter masking the tension that simmered beneath the surface. Her parents, seated at the head of the room, were as poised as ever. Victoria with her flawless smile, and Thomas with his air of quiet authority. Ryan, her brother, stood at their side, the golden child in his element, perfectly placed in the spotlight. They looked like the perfect family, as they always did. But Emily knew the truth. And today, that truth would be exposed for everyone to see. Without warning, Emily walked up to the stage and took the microphone. The room fell silent, the guests pausing mid-conversation, curious about what was happening. Her parents' eyes widened in disbelief as she stood there, poised and steady, ready to speak the words that would dismantle everything they had worked so hard to build. For a moment, the world seemed to slow down. Emily took a deep breath, steadying herself. She had waited for this moment her entire life, the years of being treated as invisible, the constant neglect, the manipulation, and the betrayal. All of it had led to this. "I'm not here to celebrate with you," she began, her voice clear and unwavering. "I'm here to reveal the truth." Her parents' faces twisted in shock. Thomas shifted uncomfortably in his chair, and Victoria's eyes flicked nervously around the room, trying to gauge how much damage Emily might be about to do. But Emily didn't care. The time for pretending was over. She continued, her words gaining strength with every sentence. "For years I've been overlooked, treated like I didn't matter, a shadow in my own family. But you know what? I'm done. I'm done being the invisible daughter you never wanted. I'm done pretending I'm not worthy of love or respect." She paused, letting her words sink in, and then she hit them with the truth. "You've lied. You've manipulated. You've controlled everything and everyone around you, including me. You've hidden your secrets, your financial misdeeds, your underhanded tactics. I know everything. And now, so will everyone else." The room was dead silent. The guests, who had been watching the performance of a lifetime just moments before, now stood frozen, unsure of how to react. Emily could see their faces shift from confusion to realization as the weight of her words settled in. She could feel the eyes of the room on her, but it wasn't fear that gripped her. It was power. She wasn't the scared, invisible daughter anymore. She was in control, and the truth was on her side. Her parents, finally recovering from the shock, tried to regain control of the situation. Victoria's voice rang out, laced with panic. "Emily, stop this right now. This isn't the place. This isn't the time. You're making a mistake." Thomas, his face pale with fury, stood up and tried to approach the stage. "This is ridiculous, Emily. You don't know what you're saying. We've given you everything. You've always had a place in this family." But Emily stood firm, not flinching as her father's words tried to regain the upper hand. She didn't let him interrupt her. "You treated me like I was nothing," she said, her voice steady, unwavering. "But now, the world will see who you really are. You're not the perfect parents. You're not the perfect family. You're just a mask, a facade, and it's about to crumble." Her father opened his mouth to speak again, but this time Emily cut him off. "The truth has been buried for too long, and now it's coming to light. You've spent your entire lives manipulating people, controlling them, hiding behind a perfect image. But you can't hide anymore. The world will know you for what you truly are: power-hungry, manipulative, and cruel." The guests exchanged glances, murmuring among themselves. The facade of the perfect family, the perfect life, was shattered. Her parents, once so untouchable, now stood exposed for their greed, their lies, and their cruelty. As her parents scrambled to salvage their reputation, Emily felt a sense of liberation wash over her. This was the moment of her redemption, the moment she had taken back her power. She wasn't the invisible child anymore, she was the one in control. And in that moment, Emily knew that she had won. Not just against her family, but against everything that had held her down. She had finally found her voice, and nothing could take it away from her now. The fallout was immediate, and the consequences of Emily's actions rippled through her family like a storm. Her parents, once powerful figures in the business world, watched in disbelief as their empire crumbled. Business deals that had taken years to secure fell apart overnight. Their once loyal connections turned their backs, and their influence evaporated as the truth came to light. The pristine image they had worked so hard to project was shattered beyond repair. Ryan, her younger brother, found himself caught in the fallout as well. Though he had never been as directly involved in the deceit, his silence, his refusal to stand by Emily when it mattered most, left him tainted by the scandal. Once the golden child, he now struggled to rebuild his life, his reputation forever linked to the lies that had destroyed their family. Emily couldn't help but feel a pang of sadness for him, but she knew that his path was no longer hers to fix. He had to face the consequences of his own choices. But for Emily, the aftermath was different. She had expected to feel guilt or regret, but instead, she felt something she hadn't felt in years: peace. The weight of her family's rejection, the crushing burden of never being good enough, no longer had a hold on her. For the first time in her life, she was free. Free from their toxic expectations, free from their manipulation. She had reclaimed her power, and nothing could take it away from her now. Sitting in her new office, surrounded by the fruits of her own labor, Emily reflected on the journey that had brought her here. She had gone from being the broken, invisible daughter to a woman fully in control of her own life. The walls she had built to protect herself had become the foundation of her success. Each piece of her new world was a testament to her strength, her resilience, and her ability to stand alone. Emily had learned that family wasn't just about blood, it was about who you choose to stand with. And through everything, she had learned to stand on her own, no longer relying on the validation of people who had never truly seen her. She had found her worth, not in their eyes, but in her own. And in that, she had found freedom. Have you ever faced betrayal in your family? How did you handle it? Share your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. What would you do if you were Emily? Would you confront your family, or would you walk away and rebuild your life? Let's talk about it. If you found this story empowering, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories about standing up for yourself and finding your strength.